for is not limited to divination. That's in healing, that's in all of the helping things. So in that sense, I want to say, well, it's another issue. On the other hand, we deal with it because we learn how to do the divination partly by reading for one another. We come from a place of not trusting ourselves. So we read for somebody else, they give us some feedback, we start feeling, hey, we can do this. At the same time, though, we want to continue to learn how to do it for ourselves. I mean, the psychic that can only get insights for other people but not for themselves, there's not really much good. It sort of defeats the purpose. But at the same time, sometimes people will do their best when they're doing for somebody else. So I use that as a way of starting. You start with somebody else, learn that you can do it now, now do it with yourself. So there are those two factors involved. But in the counseling class, we take up, I mean, that's the starting place of the whole foundation of how to be helpful. Is to come from a place of vulnerability and sharing rather than of expertise. And that, of course, figures into divination as a system of helping somebody else. Here the emphasis is more on let's explore intuition and synchronicity. We happen to be lots of times using a thing in which we are helping somebody, but that's secondary to the focus. When we think about doing divination for somebody else, it automatically brings up the question of the relationship between the diviner and the person who's seeking help. And if we really want to understand divination, then not just from a technical point of view, but from a spiritual perspective as well, then relationship itself is a key concept. Edgar Cayce often talked about correlating those truths, meaning putting two patterns together and looking at their relationship. So the very act of divination, that is correlating patterns, is one of using the idea of relationship, using relationship between patterns, relationship between yourself and divine order, or if you're doing a reading for somebody else, then a relationship between you and them. So a student who asks about the role of relationship in divination stimulated quite an interesting response, which we can look at now. Correlate those truths is another way of saying, we live in a relationship world. We live in an interconnected world. And it is, knowing divine harmony is to knowing two things. It's your song and the theme that's playing. I mean, it's a dance. So if you want to develop a relationship-based worldview, say, as opposed to a thing-based worldview, which is sort of at the heart of the whole feminist revision of thinking in so many different fields. Well, divination certainly is one place in which you can work that out, because the whole thing is predicated on there is an inherent relationship amongst all things. And that is what the harmony is. Well, what is harmony? I mean, that's a playing together, a chord that has a special sound. At an earlier seminar a few years back, I presented the idea of divination in a totally different way, using the statement from Pythagoras that the man is a measure of all things. This is a holographic type of idea in that all of the universe can be reflected in the human being. And thus, the human being and their parts of their body, for example, could reflect things that were going on in the cosmos. So even though the sound quality of this particular clip is not that great, I think it's worth listening to this alternative vision of divination, which actually is a different form of conceiving divine order. Out of divination divination is coming out of an inner instinct for the general oneness and interconnectedness of things. We can theorize about it a little bit today, at this point at the end of the 20th century, but divination didn't really originate out of some kind of a theory. More, divination is a confession, you might say, or an expression about how people feel in their hearts about how life is all one. One of the other titles for the course that I've had sometimes is The Measure of All Things. And that's from a quote by Pythagoras. Pythagoras is a very important figure in divination and measurement generally. And one of his famous quotes, modernizing it slightly, is that the human is the measure of all things. You are the measure of all things. And that kind of idea is that God, the creator, universe is reflected in you. That there's something about you, whether it's your head and your hands and your feet, and standing in some kind of a posture, or if it's a hair on your head, or the lines in your hand, or the patterns in your spit, or images in your mind, or whatever piece of you we take or look at, that little part reflects the whole, that the human being is a reflection of the whole, and that somehow the human being can become involved in something, involved in the imagery, involved in throwing sticks on the ground, involved in looking around at the pattern of the leaves or what have you, and according to the way they are prompted and stimulated, get a glimpse, a snapshot of what's happening in the universe as a whole. So this kind of a sense of almost, you can imagine and project yourself way back, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. And I can remember having something like this in my psychedelic days, of an experience where all of a sudden I'm standing around and I'm aware of all beings. And I'm aware of all creation, and it's like I've been here forever in my mind. I'm just sort of a part of it all. And everything is, you might say, vibrating to the same tuning fork, and everything is a part of everything. It's also in that seminar, I expressed the sentiment that I've expressed here today and can be repeated many times, and that is the goal of this training is not simply to teach you how to read tarot cards, but is to awaken your intuition so that you can begin to perceive divine order or the finer relationship among all things in your daily life. Listen to the way I said it back then. Because you will very likely form an attachment. One of you is going to get involved in the Donald Duck Tarot deck and is going to find it really exciting and say, oh, I found the secret to life in the Donald Duck Tarot deck. And another of you is going to get involved with the Wheaties crystal system of divination, and it's going to be the answer to all things. And you're going to go around and give readings and base naming your kids on what the Wheaties say and stuff. And that would be fine, because that's a natural thing that we can do. That's why they wouldn't have a prescription against worshiping idols in the Bible if it were a natural thing to do. That we tend to worship and are hypnotized by the effects that we see. So that's only natural. But I'd like you at the same time to have an appreciation how, that the Wheaties that you're using or the Donald Duck Tarot deck is just an expression of a system. And if you happen to be without your Wheaties, maybe you could use some oatmeal and it would work just as well. Or maybe you could see how the wind was blowing in the trees and it might work just as well. And you don't have your Donald Duck Tarot deck with you that day, well, you could use a regular deck of cards, or just go inside and close your eyes and pictures would come and it would be all right. It might not be as stimulating as your Donald Duck deck, but you wouldn't feel somehow caught and dependent upon the device. So we want to strike some kind of a balance between kind of understanding the inner spirit and at the same time having the practicality of being able to use these particular devices, and that's going to be part of it, sort of generalized.